I'm really pleased to be presenting some of my stuff to you as a SciPub evening. I'm sorry that we can't actually meet in person and you can't be buying me a beer after you're incredibly impressed by my presentation. So just bear with me. I've now lost my screen. Let me see if I can find it. There we go. Okay, so welcome, and let's move on. So this is a science in the pub, but I'm going to convince you that it also includes social science. I'm a social science researcher that's passionate about dogs. I have lived with dogs all my life. I've been involved in dog breeding since I was a young child. My mum started breeding Shetland sheepdogs and Polish lowland sheepdogs in 1974. We have a kennel name, Barad, and I grew up with dogs that I did obedience and agility with, and we did some dog showing. Did that until I was about 15 or 16, and then had a break. Family life and being an academic and being a lawyer took over. But again, missed it and started about 15 years ago with my twin sister. I decided to start breeding Italian greyhounds, which are the little critters on the right in the photo. She started breeding Tibetan spaniels and chihuahuas. So passionate about dogs, law, academic, and when it came time to doing a PhD, I sort of decided that I'd put a few things together. So after a legal career, I became an academic and teaching business law, corporate governance, regulatory compliance, tax, financial management, things like that. When it became time to do a PhD, I wanted to do something useful. I wanted to do something dog related if possible. And my primary passion or area of passion is regulatory compliance. How do we make people comply with laws? What kind of things can we put in place to encourage compliance with regulations? That's what regulatory compliance is about. So my topic was born from that, and my PhD, which I completed a couple of years ago, looked at the role and effectiveness of regulation in dog breeding. So how do we make sure that anyone who breeds those dogs in a fair way that looks after the parents' welfare, that produces puppies that are temperamentally, physically and genetically sound. So that's kind of the basis of what underpinned my PhD. Can't talk to you about all of that, but I can certainly talk to you about some of it. So what I'm talking about today is just two things that came out of my PhD. Is a dog property? What does the law have to say about that? And what do we think about whether it's okay to commercially breed companion animals? Because we do commercially breed lots of animals, but there's kind of a lot of emotion around breeding companion animals commercially. So they're the two things I want to talk to you about today. The first thing we want to look at is a dog property? Simple answer is yes, in the eyes of, I guess, society and law, and law represents a snapshot into how society views things currently, that a dog is deemed to be property. But it's yes, but complicated is my answer. We have more duties and a lot of law around dog ownership, dog breeding, because we know that this type of property has feelings, this type of property is sentient, this kind of property is, tugs at many people's heartstrings. So the law is quite vast around dog ownership and dog management and dog breeding. So we accept as a society that dogs are sentient, which means they can feel pain, they have emotions, and they have a role to play in society. And we can look at that in another session. But dog is property, but it's more complicated than that. So there's a lot of case law that looks at dogs. So part of my PhD, I did a case law analysis, and dogs are considered all the way up to the High Court of Australia. And in a case in 2015, where poor old Mr. Isbester had the council given an order to have his dog that was declared dangerous put to sleep. The majority of the High Court confirmed that an interest in a dog is a right in property, but they also acknowledged that for many, an interest in a dog is as a domestic pet, and as such, decisions being made by a council to subordinate an owner's rights to the public interest must be done in accordance with natural justice. So this wasn't a case that sort of pushed the boundaries on dog not being property, which some case law does do, but this was one that said we've got to acknowledge that law, that we can't just value a dog as property. We have to acknowledge the unique, I guess, attachment that people get to their dogs as a domestic pet. So the law does get a little bit complicated, and a lot of emotion involved when you're saying that your dog, your property, has to be destroyed because it's been dangerous, and it's in the best interest of the public to have it put to sleep. Okay, so the law, looking at that, I'm a lawyer, so of course I would like to look at the law. In Australia, we have a lot of law in relation to dogs, and I prepared a framework for that in my PhD, but suffice here to say that contract law applies. We can buy and sell property. So, yeah, we can buy and sell property, so we can buy and sell dogs. We can lease dogs. We can't be cruel to our dogs, and we have to provide them with basic animal welfare, feed them, house them appropriately, etc. That's all under the Animal Welfare Act 1993. We can't have our dogs creating a nuisance. We can't have them barking, pooing places. We have to control them, and all local councils have myriads of animal management regulations that they have to oversee. Those of us that breed dogs, we have some regulation, some state regulation currently exists in Victoria, New South Wales and Canberra and the ACT, but we don't have state-based industry breeding regulation in Tasmania currently. We do have an industry body called the Australian National Kennel Council that regulates us if we want to be a member of their body, a member of that body, and we have to breed our dogs according to their ethical, their breeding code, which talks about ethical breeding. All breeders who are commercially breeding dogs need to comply with the Australian consumer law. So if you are a provider of a good or a provider of a service, your goods have to be fit for purpose, merchantable quality, corresponding with description. So again, if you're a dog breeder and you acknowledge you're doing it commercially, then you have to comply with that legislation. Now, that's the law, a snapshot of the law in Australia. Other countries have different sets of regulations around dog ownership and dog breeding. Some countries are more regulated, some are less. Some countries are starting to think about the rights that animals have, the rights that dogs have. So there's legal thought around some countries, like in Europe, some of the more, I guess, developed countries like Finland, Sweden, Denmark are sort of thinking what we might say is radical, thinking about maybe giving non-human animals legal personification. So moving towards animals having rights like humans have rights. And again, that's an interesting thing. It's not something that I particularly advocate for, see happening in the years to come in Australia. I definitely believe in animal welfare, but whether we need to move towards animal rights in that strict sense is just a matter for, I guess, personal decision, discussion, etc. The second topic I looked at here, I want to look at with you, question I want to ask you is, do you think it's okay to commercially breed companion animals? So as my part of my PhD, I did ask this actual question. I set up an online survey and I asked participants a number of questions. And one was, do you believe there should be commercial dog breeding in Australia? That's quite an emotive question, but I asked it like that, and I gave participants the chance to say yes or no, and also if they wanted to explain why they said yes and why they said no. And I got nearly 3,000 responses, and almost everyone did feel the need to give me an explanation of why they felt quite strongly yes or no. So here's the responses. Here's my statistics. Tessa was keen for me to have a statistical aspect in my presentation to you, and I do. Do you believe there should be commercial dog breeding in Australia? Almost 40% said yes, and almost 60, or just over 60% said no. So you can see that there is many people, 60% of people say no, we should not have commercial dog breeding. Now, I found that interesting. I'm a breeder. I call myself commercial because I sell my puppies for money. I make money, which I then pump back into my breeding because it's expensive to breeding. But technically, I'm a commercial breeder. But the law, I don't disclose that income. Perhaps I should. That's another area for debate. But most people view themselves as being a hobby breeder, even though they make money. So a lot of it is semantics. But anyway, why do so many people not agree with commercial dog breeding? Maybe that they don't understand what the term means. Participants, as I said, were able to provide more detail if they said yes or no. And here's some statistic, some more information. 235 equated commercial breeding with puppy farming. Now, we all know that puppy farming, in the term that the media gives that term, is breeding dogs for money, but not giving those breeding stock proper welfare, not genetically testing puppies, not genetically testing breeding stock, not caring about appropriately socializing the adults, the puppies, keeping them in cages, etc. So the idea of puppy farming is very abhorrent to many people. It's often, big, large commercial farms are exposed, etc. So people don't like puppy farming. So if you equate commercial with puppy farming, then of course we're going to say no. 185 other people said that they didn't agree with commercial breeding because until all dogs have homes, commercial breeding is just wrong. So again, that's a matter for people to consider. The yes camp, quite a few people said yes, and here's a quote: "There will always be commercial dog breeding, whether legal or illegal. It should be legal so that the industry can be monitored and regulated appropriately, not driven underground. If there was no legal breeding at all, it would open the door for even more backyard puppy farm type breeders." That's an interesting comment, and something I agree with. So I've got to move on because I'm close to my 12 minutes. Thank you very much for listening. I'm happy. So thank you very much for listening. Happy to answer any questions. I'm going to be available on Thursday at 8 a.m. So you can ask me questions. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.